Coming up on this episode, the Warriors find themselves in perhaps their most perilous position in quite some time. I'll go through everything that's happened over the last few days, my thoughts, and more importantly, what's next for the franchise. Yes, welcome back to the Golden State with Mates podcast. So much has happened in Warriors basketball over the last few days since the last podcast. Honestly, I wanted to do one after the Nuggets loss, and it probably would have been great content, but it could have also been incredibly embarrassing because I was so irate and so frustrated after that Nuggets loss that I could have said some things that I may have regretted afterwards. And so, as disappointed as I am, because it could have been some great content, I'm probably also happy that I was able to calm myself down and not go through with that. I think some of you might have seen what I was saying on social media, even during the game as the Nuggets came back. But we'll get into all of that and the frustrations and whatever else. But I'll probably be a little bit more calm than what I would have been had the Warriors obviously won that game and were able to close things out after having an 18-point lead, which they ended up collapsing in a heap and losing by 3. But I want to go all the way back because it has been such a huge 72 hours. So I want to kind of take it into chronological order. Haven't done a podcast since after the Dallas game, I believe it was. They played the Heat, then the Mavericks, I think. And then had the episode with Josh, obviously, talking about different trade speculation. Go check that out if you haven't already. The Magic game. Good win there. And that kind of starts us off, and I'm going to, at the end, I suppose, try and paint things in a different lens maybe. But a good win over the Magic, right? Hard fought one, tough, but that's what happens. Orlando are a very good team. They're top 5 in defense for a reason. But the Warriors, through Steph, he led the way. But it was really a team performance. We're able to get the job done there, and a vitally important one. And then obviously we go into the Denver game where the third quarter, the Warriors outscore the Nuggets 44-24 after giving up 70 points in the first half. Probably the best Golden State basketball we've seen for quite some time. Now, there might have been games last season where quarters or whatever else where they'd played that well, but this was certainly this season against the kind of opponent that Denver is, being the reigning champions. This was their best performance of the season in terms of one quarter. The third quarter, some of the ball movement and some of the stuff they were doing offensively was really like prime Warrior stuff, like really crisp ball movement, making the right decisions on every pass, not turning the ball over, obviously shooting the ball well, taking advantage of getting stops defensively, getting out in transition, taking advantage of perhaps some lackadaisical Warrior defense. And then early fourth quarter started out good enough again. Pods has that steal and layup, which puts the Warriors up 18 with 7.5 minutes to go. It was probably the loudest, at least watching on TV and from what I've heard from people on social media, probably the loudest that Chase Center has been all season at that point. Again, against that opponent, Golden State had played very well up to that point. Even in the first half, they gave up 70. Yes, defensively they weren't great, but they put up 63 points. They were good offensively. Again, some of the ball movement was excellent. And the next 7 minutes or so, 6.5 minutes, because I think out of the timeout, I think Denver scored, and then I think Wiggs scored. So this margin was still 18 with less than 7 minutes remaining. And from there, you couldn't quite believe what you were seeing. And to collapse like they did, to get a Nikola Jokic absurd 3 at the buzzer from near half court, I won't lie. Obviously, to begin with in the run, so Denver finished on a 25-4 run. Early on, I was like, okay, they need to do something about this. And then the further it went, and specifically the further Steve Kerr went without playing Jonathan Kaminga again, who had 16 points, 4 rebounds, 4 assists in less than 19 minutes in the first 2.5 quarters. And in the third quarter, I think he had 7 points alone. His last play was basically an and one on Jamal Murray, where he took advantage of that mismatch, was able to power up over him and get an and one layup. The fact that he didn't go back to him, I'll get into this, but really, okay, let's get into it now, because it's top of the agenda, right? I was speaking with a mate about it yesterday, and I was trying to come up with a worse coaching decision that I've seen, not just in basketball, in my life of watching sport. And I am, ask anyone, I am flat out addicted to sport. I've been watching sport thanks to my dad since I can remember, right? Since I came out of the womb. Like, I've been watching sport. And I was trying to think about it with a mate. I was like, have I seen a worse coaching decision in my life? And with basketball, it takes a lot for me to get frustrated, like really frustrated at any one game. Because there's 82 games in a season, it means that every game doesn't mean as much as other sports like NFL for most Americans, or AFL for me, kind of thing, where, I mean, AFL, we play 22, 23 games a season before the final series or the playoffs. And so every game means more, and every game means less in basketball because there's just so many games. And so every win, every loss, it kind of doesn't mean as much to me. Obviously, overall, it means as much, but it doesn't mean as much on an individual game-by-game basis. And so it takes a lot for me to get really frustrated to the point of angry. And I don't recall being as angry at a coaching decision or at a generally, I guess, a result as what I was in that Denver game. I was boiling to the point where, again, one of my sayings is, if you don't laugh, you'll cry. And I've said that before on the podcast. And I was genuinely, when that Jokic 3 went in, I laughed. I was, of course. But I was actually glad. And if you guys follow me on Twitter, you would have seen I tweeted out a couple of times. I think firstly when the Warriors were still up 4 or 6 points or something, and I said, I really hope Denver come back and win this, or something along those lines. And then after Steph had that horrible turnover on the Warriors' last offensive possession where he tried to throw across court, got intercepted by Jamal Murray, the Nuggets took the timeout with 3 seconds remaining or whatever, and I tweeted out during the timeout, I said, please hit a game winner at Nuggets. And Jokic did. And people on Twitter had a crack at me saying I jinxed it and everything. But I'm actually, as angry as I was at Steve, I was actually glad the Warriors lost. Because in that scenario, had they held on and won by a point or two, or anything less than 5 points, whatever, then what went wrong down the stretch there probably would have been glossed over. And everyone would have been like, it's all right, they won, let's move on. When, no, we had to have a serious conversation about what took place down the stretch there. And not playing a guy who played very, very well, who the coach himself acknowledged played great, to not play him in the final 18 minutes when he is one of your top 5 players. And I know valuing Warrior players outside Steph is very difficult right now with how the roster is constructed. Players 2 through 11 or 12, it's hard to value, okay, who's the most important, who's the best. But Jonathan Kuminga has been very, very good for the large parts of this stretch without Draymond Green since he's been in the starting lineup, which is now, I think, 12 games, is it? He's scored in double digits the last 14 games, I think he's now up to. He had to play. There is no other way around it. And I was actually more annoyed, more angry, more frustrated the fact that Steve acknowledged that he played great. Some of the point of attack defense in the first 2.5 quarters was maybe questionable. And then there were other plays where Andrew Wiggins was obviously the primary defender when he was out on the floor for the likes of Jamal Murray, and he had a couple of really good plays defensively. So if Steve wanted to come out and make the argument that we preferred Wiggs' defense over JK over the last 18 minutes, and we had some issues with JK's lack of defensive intent or effort while he was out there, then you could have at least made that argument. I don't think it would have validated not playing him, and it would not have validated him not playing in the last 18 minutes. But at least it would have been some kind of reasoning. And instead he goes, it's just the situation of the game, and we preferred to go with Wiggs. And that's why he didn't play in the last 18 minutes. And he acknowledged that JK played great in the first 2.5 quarters. My issue with that is that Steve actually tried different things. And this was another thing that was so frustrating, was that he actually did show some flexibility. So over that 7-minute period, everyone that took the floor, which was 9 players for the game, Moses Moody was a DNP. Of the 9 players that played in that game, all but JK played in the last 7 minutes. So he was going through combinations of Surridge and TJD together, just Surridge, just TJD, Looney, CP3 was obviously out there, Wiggs was out there, Pods was out there, and then you obviously had Steph and Clay as well. Like, he was going through different combinations and trying different things to try and halt the momentum. The fact that Jonathan Kaminga was stapled to the bench and was just an onlooker like the rest of us was flat out disgusting. Like, disgusting to the point where it made me actually, I'm going to say, it made me suspicious. It made me think there's something going on here that is more than just this game. Like, there's something going on here. And so, obviously, after that, I wake up the next morning, Australian time over here, and the first thing I read is the report from Shams. I've got Shams on tweet notifications. So the first thing I do every morning, basically, is get my phone out, check my Twitter notifications, whatever. And so Shams has the report, and I read the report, and it says Jonathan Kaminga has lost faith in Steve Kerr, and that this is quote, the 2021 lottery pick no longer believes Kerr will allow him to reach his full potential. Sources close to Kaminga tell The Athletic. And at that point, Warrior social media has gone into a meltdown, and I think the majority of people are on JK's side, and this was the first time where Steve Kerr's job as head coach of the Golden State Warriors was really under question, and not just from Warrior fans, but league-wide. Late in that Denver game, I had mates messaging me who are not Golden State fans, who are semi-NBA, who like the NBA, but they're not addicted. Like, they wouldn't watch it every day, obviously, because for us in Australia, games are on during the middle of the day when most people are at work. I had mates messaging me saying, why is Jonathan Kaminga not back in the game? And seriously, like, asking questions about that. And if they, non-Warrior fans, are questioning what Steve Kerr's doing, that just goes to show you the kind of narrative that was being built here, not just among Warrior fans, but you had, analysts like Kevin O'Connor at The Ringer who called it coaching malpractice, and he was completely right, and he wrote an article about it, and obviously he covers the entire league, not just Golden State. And so this was the first time to me where Warrior fans have been questioning some of what Steve's been doing the entire season, but this was so egregious. The fact that JK didn't get back in the game was so egregious, so wrong, that the storyline became a league-wide thing. And so when I wake up and see that report, I think majority of people, including myself, are on JK's side and say, good on him. Good on him, because there is no way that he should have to deal with this crap anymore. He's too good not to be playing 25 plus minutes a night. For me, Moses Moody is a little bit of a different situation. Now, obviously, if we fast forward a little bit to yesterday's game against the Pistons, fans chanting for Moses Moody. On the broadcast in the pregame, I think there were signs in the background, free Kaminga, free Moody. Fans chanting for Moses to get in the game. He finally did early in the fourth quarter to a standing ovation. And rightly so. But as I've said previously on this podcast, I do have some sympathy for Steve in regard to the Moses situation, because when the Warriors are fully healthy, I'm not actually like, we can say Moses deserves minutes, and he does, but who does he play over? And that's an issue with the Warrior roster, if you ask me. That's just the issue with the roster. There's too many good players that deserve to play, but not enough top-end talent, and so they're an average team overall. But I have some sympathy with Kerr, and I don't think that he should necessarily cop too much in the way of Moses Moody, because when they're fully healthy, then I don't know who he plays over. But we'll talk more about Moses in a second. But in regards to JK, he's arguably, on some nights, he's the second best player on the team. And for most of this stretch, since Draymond's been out, he's been really, that one bad game against Miami where he had 6 turnovers in the first half, that was a bad game. But aside from that, he's been pretty consistent. He's been consistently very good. And some nights he's your second best player. Some nights he's your third best player. Some nights he's fourth or fifth. But he's a top 5 player on this team. I'm ready to say he's a top 5 player on this team for 90% of games. And you know what? When he has games like he did against Miami where he's really bad in the first half, or maybe he's bad in the first 2.5 quarters, then you can bench him. He's not I'm not saying it has to be a guaranteed closer. But when he plays well, like, what are you doing? What are you doing, benching? Like, there has to be more to it. And so I like that he came out and had those. Well, he didn't have those comments. I suppose he would have had the comments to people close to him who have then revealed those to Shams and the Athletic. So I was happy, and I think most Warrior fans are in the same situation where we have to look at this as for those fans that aren't Warrior fans that don't follow Golden State on a consistent basis. They might see Steve Kerr, 4-time championship winning coach, and he is elevated as one of the greatest coaches in the history of the game, and that therefore that's just who he is. That's what he is. Well, no. No, that's not the case. This season, Steve Kerr has not been a great coach. He just hasn't been. The Warriors would have a significantly better record if he was coaching very well, and he's just not. And again, it's like coaches are like players. Like, they have their games where they're in good form, their lineups, their rotations, what they're doing is good, and then other nights they don't. And as far as coaching performances go, the last 7 minutes of that game and the decision not to go to Jonathan Kaminga was as bad as it can get. Like, that's as worse a decision as I've ever seen in any sporting code in my entire life. And I've had now 48 hours to digest it and calm down a little bit, and I still believe I still believe it is the worst coaching decision I've ever seen in my life watching any sport anywhere around the world. It just is. So I think everyone, including myself, is wondering, like, what's going on here? Because I think a reporter or someone quoted saying this was once, it might have been Marcus Thompson, the Athletic. I'm not 100% sure. I need to go back and check. I apologize. But it was someone quoted saying it's one step away from a trade request. And it's funny because I don't think only superstars request trades. And so I don't think JK would ever come out and say, yeah, I need to be off this team. I'm putting my hand up and requesting a trade. But this was the closest thing you possibly could to it, right? It really was. And so at that point, we could even say 24 hours ago, maybe it's 3 p.m. in the afternoon here, yesterday morning, so let's say 30 hours ago. At that point, you think the chance of Jonathan Kaminga being on this team past the trade deadline is sitting at 10%. Maybe if you're lucky, if you're generous, it might be 10%, but it might be even less. And yet, by the end of the 6, 7, 8 hours later, by the end of the day, American time, the storyline, the narrative had shifted again. Because, as has been the way with JK's handling from Steve Kerr, he plays a season-high 36 minutes against the Detroit Pistons yesterday. The ironic thing is, for all the storyline about JK and Steve right now, the ironic thing is that he has now played a season-high in minutes in 2 of his last 3 games. So before the game against the Magic, he'd played 30 minutes once this season. Once in 32 games. He played one. In fact, I think he might have missed a game, so maybe 31. Whatever. Doesn't matter. He plays a season-high 34 against Orlando. Then that absolute mess against Denver. But then has 36 minutes yesterday against the Pistons. And you know what? Didn't play overly well. That's the hilarious thing is he played better against Denver than he did against Detroit. And yet, one game he gets less than 19 minutes, and the next game he gets nearly 36. In one game, Andrew Wiggins is preferred, and in the other game, Andrew Wiggins plays less. Wiggs played less than 90 minutes yesterday. And so afterwards, JK, who's sporting a new haircut, we might also imagine, which spurred on social media even more with, okay, what's going through this guy's head right now? From what happened last night against Denver to the report coming out to shaving his head, like, what is going on with this guy? And then I'll also mention, when they announced the starting lineup, so JK's in the starting lineup. I don't know if anyone picked up on this on the broadcast. When they called his name in the starting lineup, and maybe I got it wrong, or maybe I'd have to go back and check, I could not see him at all. Like, I just couldn't see him. And at some point, it's like, has he just like run off to the tunnel and just thought, nah, I'm not playing this game? Because at that point, it wouldn't have probably been too surprising. But anyway, he plays 36 minutes. Unbelievable. First half, he played very well in the first half. Let's say that. 11 points, 4 rebounds, responded in really positive fashion. It was really good. Second half, he was really subdued. So, second half, he took a total of 2 shots. He had 2 rebounds, 0 points, 1 assist, and 3 turnovers. And yet, Steve was like, this guy doesn't have any faith in me, but I'll show faith in him because he's just done that, which is not much, but yet he played over 19 minutes in the second half alone. He was a plus 16 for the game, a game, so he played a game high 36 minutes and it was a game high plus 16. And then afterwards to reporters, he says, I love it here. I got drafted here. There's always ups and downs. I feel like when you look at all the ups and downs, that will confuse a lot of people. But I know Steve believes in me. I know he trusts me at this point. It was just more about communication, better understanding. It wasn't no beef. And so all of a sudden we get to a point where now I feel better about the situation. Like those comments, those post-game comments have to ease concerns about like what could happen next. And so what does happen next? I still think there's a 50-50 chance he's off the team within a month. And that's still because of, yes, the lack of trust and faith from Steve, but also just because he's like got the most value. I still think he'd have more value than Pods, even though any team that trades for him is either going to have to give him a contract extension this offseason or try and re-sign him as a restricted free agent next offseason. So despite that, I still think he has the most value because I think they were having this conversation on 95.7 The Game, and I didn't really listen to it, but I saw it on Twitter. They were having the conversation of what is Jonathan Kaminga? Like, is he a future All-Star? In terms of championship teams, what number is he a number 1 guy, number 2 guy, number 3 guy? And should we be having all these conversations and all this uproar and furor about a guy who is still making his way in the league, let's be honest, and does he actually have star potential still 3 years in? Because by this point, we probably should know or not. I actually think the lack of trust and lack of opportunity that Steve has provided him does mean we still do not know. And again, for most players 3 years in, you would know whether or not this guy's going to be a star or not. Or at least at that point, he probably should be almost. But I genuinely think we don't know. Now, I don't think he's ever going to be the best player on a championship team. I do not think that for a moment. I probably doubt he can be the second best player on a championship team. I do think he might be the third. He could be the third. And on a very good team, that still might be an all-star or close to an all-star. Like if you think of, let's say, a Drew Holiday, for example, or a Michael Porter Jr. on the Nuggets. Like if you go back to the last few championship teams, aside from the Warriors, who I suppose Steph, Wiggs, Clay, Dre, that was kind of the top 4 on the team. But if you look at, aside from that, Milwaukee 2021, Giannis, Middleton, Holiday. So if you say Holiday's the third, and Denver last season, if you've got Jokic, Murray, and then we obviously put Porter, I think, ahead of Gordon. So if you say Michael Porter Jr., Drew Holiday, if you put Kuminga, if you say his ceiling's that's still a very high-level player. Especially, like, Holiday is a 2-time All-Star, I believe. Like, that's an all-star caliber player. And so I think it's deserved to have these conversations about him. And I do think it's deserved to think of this as a major and critical point for the Warriors in their short and long-term future. And I suppose it was just reassuring after the game yesterday, which, by the way, the Warriors nearly lost to Detroit. They were down with 1 minute and 40 seconds to go, which would have been a nightmare. But I think on the JK side of things, I think it was reassuring to hear him speak about the meeting that he had with Steve and the fact that he wants to still work together, obviously, and try and bring future success to this franchise. And how much of that he believes and how much of the report from Shams we should take in terms of the lack of faith. Because obviously we had that report saying he has no faith in him, no faith, and that he no longer believes he will allow him, that Steve will allow him to reach his full potential. There's that, and then there's him also saying in the same 24-hour window, I know Steve believes in me. I know he trusts me at this point. It can't be both, and ultimately it's somewhere in the middle. So we'll just wait and see. But I'm obviously a lot more confident now going into, this next month that he's maybe a 50-50 chance of being on the team going forward rather than where we were like 10% yesterday morning, like less than 36 hours ago. Yeah, it's super fascinating. But just on that Pistons game, I suppose, as a whole, can you imagine if Golden State had lost that game? Especially, so they're up 11, again, with like just over 7 minutes to go. They're up 11. And then Detroit go on a 14-2 run, I think it might have been. Take the lead with 1:40 to go. Again, I was almost laughing at the TV. I was like, you can't be serious. This is not happening again. Surely not. Not to Detroit. The team that recently went on a record, 28-game losing streak, and are 3-31, now 3-32 on the season. Imagine if the Warriors had lost at home. Fortunately, Steph hit a couple of massive threes, hit his free throws down the stretch, scored 9 points in the last 9 or 11 points. 11 points, I think it was. I think he was on 15. He ended up with 26. 11 points in the final 90 seconds to make sure the Warriors got the job done. If only just eases the pressure off them slightly, but I think JK's comments and some of the post-game comments would have eased fans' concerns more than the game itself against the Pistons, where the Warriors win by 4 in a very unconvincing fashion, scraped over the line. And so where does this leave Golden State moving forward? Well, first of all, a couple of major updates. Chris Paul fractured his hand in the third quarter against the Pistons, so he will have surgery next week and will be out for a significant period. I think I've heard like 4 to 8 weeks, and I've heard some other stuff saying you don't really know how long he's going to be out. This kind of a wide time frame in terms of when he could be back. I think there's a possibility that he might have played his last game for the Warriors, which is interesting. I would say it's maybe more unlikely than likely because I think the franchise really loves him. I think Steve obviously loves him. Chris Paul played a game-high 17 minutes in the first half yesterday. He's obviously been back in the starting lineup over the last few games. I still think it's more likely he's still on the team. I think Wiggs is probably the one who's likely to get moved. But there is a possibility that Chris Paul will not play another game for the Warriors with his $30 million contract there. And obviously it opens up some huge rotation questions going forward over this next month, particularly because CP3 will be out over that time, most likely. And of course, you've got the trade deadline looming, which the Athletic's Anthony Slater also said yesterday that the Warriors are going to be very active. Confirmed that, which we kind of already knew, but I guess reiterating it. there's going to be some questions there with the rotation, and we saw a little bit of it against the Pistons late, where Corey Joseph obviously came onto the floor and played. Moses Moody came onto the floor and played. Steve said after the game that obviously Chris's 30-plus minutes aren't going to be filled by one player, so it's going to be a bit of Corey Joseph. It's going to be a bit more of Brandon Pajemski, and it's going to be some Moses Moody as well, which I think is obviously for fans is a huge deal as well. So there's that, and there's also the fact that Draymond Green is returning, and we get the report earlier today saying that the league has now removed his indefinite suspension. The suspension is now over. And I think ESPN's Adrian Wojnarowski reported that it will take about a week for the Warriors or for Draymond, to ramp up his training and preparation for a return to the floor. So that's a real positive, because obviously the Warriors have got 2 more games on this homestand against the Raptors, which is interesting because you've got the whole Pascal Siakam piece, and I'll get into that more in a second as well. And then the New Orleans Pelicans, and then they go on the road for a 4-game road trip. So to get Draymond back for that 4-game road trip, or at least majority of it, is going to be really, really important. Especially they play Milwaukee, trying to guard Giannis. Good luck with that. You're going to need all hands on deck. You're going to need Draymond. So he's coming back. And then, of course, the other injury I didn't mention was Gary Payton II, who went down in that game against Orlando as well, with a hamstring injury, I think it is. Yeah. So he's just come off the calf, and now he has another injury that's going to put him out. I think he's going to be reevaluated in 3 weeks, so that puts him out for a while. So the initial question, what does the rotation look like? What does the starting lineup look like? I tweeted out yesterday that without Draymond, I think the Warriors' best 5 has both Wiggins and JK in it, where it's Steph, Clay, Wiggins, JK, and TJD. And there was a point in the second quarter yesterday against the Pistons where that unit was really effective, really positive. And there's a fly buzzing around. The joys of summer in Australia, there's a fly buzzing around in here. Sorry. They built that unit was really effective, and they built, I think it was close to a double-digit lead against the Pistons, and then I think JK might have gone out for Chris Paul, I think, and the lead all of a sudden shrunk back to 4 by halftime. So that without Draymond, I think, is the best lineup. I think the best lineup with Draymond, if he's going to be coming back and starting, I think it's Steph, Clay, JK, Dre, TJD. And now, obviously, Looney's been come back into the starting lineup the last couple of games, which I could see why they did it against Denver. I could see why, to guard Jokic, to have that experience out there against the best player on the planet. It didn't really help, but I can see why Steve did it. I don't know why he did it against Detroit. I would have thought going up against Jalen Duren that TJD would have actually been a better matchup. But that's all right. And TJD played well yesterday. That's the other thing. Saric and him combined for 28 points off the bench. TJD had 9 rebounds as well. So TJD played really well yesterday. I think he should be back in the starting lineup against most opponents. Against some, I can see why Looney would be in the starting lineup. But especially with Dre back, you've got that experience in the front court. I think it has to be Steph, Clay, JK, Dre, TJD. And if it wasn't to be that 5, then I think Dre should actually come off the bench. But I don't, would you put Wiggins in if that was the case? Not after how he played yesterday, you wouldn't. Obviously, there's going to be some spacing issues with that starting 5. And I can see it now, JK is going to have a mismatch or something. He's going to be posting up, or he's going to look to drive into the lane. Oh my God, we've got Dre here and TJD there and there too. And it's just the lane is going to be clogged up. And so what JK does best is really going to be negated by the fact that you've got a non-shooter out there in TJD and a practical non-shooter in Draymond, who might be shooting 40+% from 3-point range this season, but no rival team gives an absolute crap about that. They are not guarding him out on the perimeter. So I think the Warriors' ball movement is going to have to be super important for that to work. And more importantly, Steph and Clay are going to have to shoot the crap out of the ball. Shoot really well for that lineup to work. And there's going to be some pressure on them from what they do on the perimeter. But then obviously with JK and TJD, they give you the rim threat. They give you an ability to get inside that is super important. And I think some of the Warriors' ball movement over the last couple of games has been really, really good. And defensively, that should be a fantastic, fantastic lineup. And that gives you, I think, the best chance of being a really good defensive team. And I think the Warriors' offense, and most teams' offense, let's be honest, can be effective if they're going to be a good defensive team, if they can get out and transition. I think that unit needs to try and be not necessarily a three-point shooting team, obviously, even though they've got Steph and Clay there, but more so, let's get stops and let's use our speed, our ball movement, our length and athleticism with that front court, with those three players. Let's use that as a way to have an effective offense as well. And so that's what I would go with. Pods is playing well, but I don't really think he should be coming back in there and saying, okay, let's have Steph, Pods, and Clay. Maybe I think Pods might be back in the starting lineup as of the next couple of games with Dre still out. I think Pods might be there because of that secondary ball handling, playmaking ability. But when Dre comes back, he obviously provides that. So that's where I've landed, and I think that's where most should probably land on the starting five for the Warriors when Dre returns. Even though I've had conversations and on this podcast as well about Dre potentially coming off the bench when he returns, the one thing you don't want to see is Draymond coming back for JK and JK going back to the bench, because I can guarantee you that would probably signal the end of his time at the Warriors. Surely, I think it would. I just don't see how JK can go back to being a reserve. He's just played really well over this stretch without Draymond, and he deserves to continue to be a starter. So how that works, whether they push Dre to center and have JK 4, Draymond at the 5, and some other person at the 3, or Clay at the 3, Pods, Steph, maybe. Maybe Moody's the guy there at the 3 if he can play well over these. Who knows? There's so many different combinations, so many different lineups, so many question marks with Steve Kerr. As I said in previous episodes, I do have some sympathy for him and how difficult this is, and he's not going to get it right on every occasion. And I think we can't expect him to be perfect, but we've also got to expect him to do what everyone can see, and that is play Jonathan Kaminga at some point over the last 18 minutes of that game against Denver. But I don't want to labour that point because it's probably getting annoying for people. But again, I want to reiterate, probably the worst coaching decision I've ever seen in my life. Other than that, there were obviously the reports yesterday after that Denver loss. Chris Haynes of the Bleacher Report and TNT reported that the Warriors were a dark horse for Pascal Siakam, and then Sam Amico of Hoopswire also used the word dark horse in relation to the Warriors and Zach LaVine. Kind of the first time that Siakam was linked to the Warriors in any genuine report from a notable source. However, we've been discussing this, and Warrior fans have been discussing this on social media, and I've been writing about it and whatever else for a month at least, because we know that, Siakam's been acquirable. And really my thoughts on it, I've spoken about it previously. Go check out the episode I did with Josh Cornelison earlier in the week that kind of outlined my thoughts. He had a really interesting thought in terms of trading Draymond for Siakam rather than Wiggins or CP3, which I said made a lot of sense, I think. But I think Toronto are going to get better offers than what the Warriors are going to be willing to give up. Although, Wiggs, if it was Wiggs and Kaminga, then that's a pretty, and like a pick, that's a pretty good deal. I'm not actually sure Golden State. I don't think Golden State want to give up both Wiggins and Kaminga because that's your point of attack defense. I'm sorry to Gary Payton II. I'm not sure how much you can trust his body going forward now. And so if you're trading both Wiggins and Kaminga for like a genuine forward who's not going to be your point of attack defender, that leaves a massive hole there. So I would be, as much as there's a lot of trade speculation about Wiggs and JK, I'd be surprised if they're both off the team by the end of the trade deadline. I'd be surprised if they're both off the team. I think one of them will stay, and I think Oh, I don't know. I don't know. I was going to say I think it might be JK still on the team, but who knows? It could change on a daily basis. I could wake up tomorrow and they pull a trade for Siakam. Who knows? The Levine thing, I don't want to give any thoughts to. That's just disgusting. I do not want Zach Levine on the Warriors whatsoever. Yeah, sure, he gives you a second scorer next to Steph. Fine, whatever. Maybe he's a two-time All-Star to his credit, whatever. No. Sorry. Doesn't scream winning player to me. Does not scream a Warrior style player to me. Just no. Do not even entertain. If the Warriors trade for Zach LaVine, I might be more angry than I was at Steve after the Denver game, and I was very angry then. So no to Zach LaVine. We might finish it up there. Nearly 40 minutes worth. So much to unpack over the last few days for the Warriors. Apologize I haven't got to it sooner. Again, maybe somewhat happy that I didn't do one after the Denver loss, because it could have been embarrassing with some of the stuff I said and how emotional I was afterwards. But that's being a fan, right? That's following a sporting team. There's so many highs and so many lows. Fortunately, I think most of my teams that I support have more highs than lows, and that's certainly been the case for the Warriors over the last 10 years. And I think we all have to remember that when we're going through some tough times like we are now, where everyone's questioning is the dynasty over, or declaring the dynasty's over. We're just going to, it's 4 championships in the last 9 seasons, or 10 if you want to include this one. It's been such a great run, and you just got to remember that. And I think the other thing, my last point that I'll mention, is if the Warriors had just closed that game out against Denver, that's 3 straight wins, and everything I've just spoken about is basically off the table, and we're instead discussing some major positives, and the Warriors in a hot stretch of form, having beaten Orlando and Denver in back-to-back games. So maybe the reaction to the Denver loss was a bit of an overreaction, because if you just look back at that and think they played a really, really, they were playing excellent basketball in the third quarter and early fourth quarter even. And so maybe we have to look back at more of that and take more of that into account than the 7-minute collapse in the fourth quarter, which is hard to do as a fan, which is hard to do as someone analysing the game because of how jarring and how bad that last 7 minutes was. But it's not the end of the world. As much as we thought it might have been, especially the morning after, especially with that report from Shams about JK and Steve, as much as we think this might be the end and that everything's falling over and that the franchise is out on its feet, there's some hope here. There's some optimism still here, I think, and we need to try and hold on to that as much as we can. Other than that, guys, again, thank you for listening. If you've got to this point of the episode, if you haven't already, if you could subscribe on the YouTube channel, that would be greatly appreciated. Follow us on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. You can follow me at POK252, that's POK252, on Twitter, and we'll see you on the next episode.